This is Tech Talk Detroit with Brian Spurgeon and Chuck Lobert. Tech Talk Detroit brings you the latest in tech news and Detroit happenings every week.
Welcome back to Tech Talk Detroit. Happy to have you with us again. I'm Chuck. I'm here with Brian, and we're talking about a current event that came up in the past couple of weeks. I'm sure you've heard about it. It's been all over the news around the hack that Colonial Pipeline has been dealing with the ransomware. And so we thought we'd talk about that today. We said that, at times we were going to talk about current events when there was something big that was going on, and we can't talk tech without talking about this particular hack. We know we've talked about security in the past, but this is a real live thing that happened. It cost this company $5 million. It shut down 5,500 miles of gas pipeline, crippled the gas industry on the east side of it. So this was a huge thing, and that's why it's been all over the news. So we thought it was important to talk about. So, first of all, Brian, how are you doing today?
Good as usual. Heading out of town tomorrow, going down to Florida. Of course, right when the weather turns nice here in Michigan. But, that being said, looking forward to that. Other than that, everything's been going good. Just a lot going on as we're getting closer into summer and getting further away from what was the year of 2020.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I got to say, I'm jealous about the trip to Florida. I would love to get out of Michigan for a little while as well. And just hearing some of the details about your trip, it sounds like it's going to be pretty awesome. So I'm sure you're going to have a great time.
Yeah, a little shuffleboard and, a couple non-alcoholic pina coladas. Can't complain.
Right. So almost like a day in the office, except for the non-alcoholic pina colada.
Except for the non-alcoholic, exactly.
So yeah, we thought we would talk a little bit about Colonial Pipeline and DarkSide, the hacker group that's come out that's behind that attack. And the latest article that came out today talked about how DarkSide has received $90 million in ransom payments over the past 9 months. And they break that down to an average payout per company, per victim of $1.9 million. Isn't that just, it's crazy to think that if a company gets hit, and this is obviously companies of all sizes, but if a company gets hit, an average payment of $1.9 million to get access to your data back. Isn't that just like, how many companies could even deal with that?
Not a lot. And it's honestly, it's like a script out of a movie, and the hacker group DarkSide and extorting a gas company. And it's just, stuff that didn't seem realistic 15, 20 years ago. This is just kind of I hate to say it, but the new norm. This is what we're dealing with. This is the landscape we're in. That's why we spend so much time talking on this podcast and certainly talking with our clients about security and how important it is. And of that's a wide-ranging mix of companies. It's government sectors. You're talking hospitals, cities are getting hit. So to answer that question, especially a local city, they don't just have $2 million laying around. You think about what a small city has to deal with budgetary, from budget standpoint. Something like this is the impact I can only imagine.
Yeah, and the article mentioned too that even just last week there was 2 other attacks that we really haven't even heard much about. One that was dealing with a conglomerate of Toshiba, one that was dealing with the Ireland Health Service. So we can really see that this is something that is not going away. In fact, as we were talking, kind of preparing for this, you were even talking about how things have kind of changed when it comes to ransomware. Like it used to be, You got a message, your data is encrypted. If you want to get it unencrypted, just pay this amount of money. And in that type of a scenario, you might be able to get access to the encryption key and unencrypt it. You might have a backup and you're okay, but you were talking about how this one kind of presented a change that we've been hearing about as well. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I think you hit it. It was previously we're going to make your data where you're not able to access it anymore and, pay the money. You may or may not get your data back. We might decrypt it. There's never a guarantee on that. At the end of the day, they're criminals. And, that's like somebody stealing something out of your house and you're buying it back off of them, online. So from that standpoint, that's always previously been the premise around this ransomware. But recently, we've been hearing about them taking a different approach. So not only are they encrypting the data, they're additionally stealing the data. So they're making copies of your data, taking it off site, and kind of hitting it as a twofold approach. And that's what happened in this instance as well with the pipeline. We're going to encrypt it. You can't access your data, but we also have this 100 gigabytes of data that if you don't pay us, we will leak it. And that's kind of what they're proposed with. So I think the strategy behind that is a lot of companies, they have robust backup solutions now. That's one of your best lines of, that's one of your first steps typically when you do get exploited. Obviously, you got to figure out how the vulnerability came to be. You need to patch that vulnerability, but then typically you're rolling back your data. So that's where good backup solutions come in place that are, current, where you're backing up as much as you can afford to lose between your snapshots. But I think in this situation, these ransomware know that in a lot of situations, they're not getting the payout that they wanted because of backup solutions. So this is a way to kind of hit it twofold. Like, okay, that's great. You can roll back your data, but how would it do for your company, perception if we were to leak all of this? You guys see it when companies get exploited and there's personal data released, you got to go out there and you got to notify everybody right away. From a PR standpoint, it's an absolute nightmare to have to go and put out press releases stating we've been exploited and your data may be compromised. For a lot of companies, I have to imagine that that's the beginning of the end when that type of event happens. So I think that's something to be really aware of now is, if you felt like you had a good backup, and it's not a big deal if we do get ransomware, we can always go back off of that. You have to ask yourself, what would it mean though if our data was captured, and how would our clients react knowing that happened?
Yeah, exactly. Just kind of picture yourself, even not even having to do the press release, which obviously you would have to do, but even just having to go to your client base and say, hey, just so you know, we got breached, your data may be at risk or your information may be at risk. You're obviously going to lose clients. Like, how much is that going to cost you on top of having to pay this ransom? So we can see how detrimental this could be to really any business, whether you're a small business, a large business. Obviously in this instance, as we mentioned, Colonial Pipeline paid $5 million. Thankfully, the group that they dealt with was just after the money, it appears, because they, at that point, released the data back to them. But there are instances where it's not really about the money. It's about trying to harm somebody or trying to harm something. And at that point, they're probably going to just take your money, run, and still not give you your data back. So the fact that you get that ransomware in the first place is really where the concern comes in, because once it's there, now you got a lot to deal with. And I kind of came across, what to me at least was a new term when I was reading up on this particular attack, and that was ransomware as a service. So, we keep on hearing all of these different things, in our life today of as a service, what we do, managed services as technology, there's hardware as a service, there's software as a service, there's cloud as a service, there's all different types of things as a service. I never thought about ransomware as a service. So that's what this dark side company does, is basically they come up with the different ransomware tools, they develop them, they market them, and then they sell them to others who then use them to actually do the hack. So that was a new term for me. I don't know if you've come across that before, but it really shows us kind of where the industry and where security and threats and all of this stuff is really heading. The fact that it's such a well-known thing at this point.
Yeah, honestly, that was something new to me too, and it makes total sense. They're coming out with this algorithm, they're selling it to smaller entities. Then they're taking that and sending it out, and they're trying to cash in on it. It makes total sense. And I think it's just kind of what you see. It's what we always know, that the criminals, no matter what the angle is, they're always a step ahead of law enforcement. And I think that's what you're seeing here as well, is the ransomware 10 years ago, the typical, crypto, encrypt your data, you can't access it anymore. That stuff it's evolving rapidly now. They're finding different ways to deploy it. They're also finding different ways to make more money on it beyond just taking over your company. They're reselling it. It's a crazy concept to think about, but it's what we're dealing with every day.
Yeah. So when we start thinking about, what do I do to protect my business from a ransomware attack? That's kind of goes into a lot of what we've talked about in the past with, backups and having a good BDR plan and all of that. But there's also, certain protections you want to have in place. There's certain things that you just want to make sure that you're always doing to help protect it. And, as we've talked about in the past, a big thing is just simply training your employees. So I don't think I've seen the exact details of how this particular attack, happened, how the breach happened, but we know is ransomware. So there, most likely somebody got an email, somebody clicked on something that they, took them somewhere that they weren't intending to go to. And that's kind of what probably triggered a lot of this. So, again, we've talked about employee training in the past and making sure that your staff knows what to look for, what to be suspicious of when it comes to different emails or different links or different things like that. So that's another big spot where that employee training and that security awareness training, that's the term I was trying to get to in my head, that security awareness training really comes into play, because if you have somebody that knows what to look for, right there, that's going to take care of a lot of these issues, because they're going to spot whether it's incorrect grammar or double checking a link before you click on it to make sure it's actually going to where it says it is, even after you click on it, before you click on anything else, making sure that the link is what it said it was. There's lots of different things that training is gonna kind of help them to look out for.
Yeah, I think the education of your end users is really where it starts. If your end users aren't aware of what's out there and what to look for, then as great as your security policy can be, you're always going to have that. That'll be always your first and most vulnerable exploit that's out there. And beyond that, I think you got to have a strong security policy. You got to know what your users are allowed to do and not allowed to do. And I think you have to look at, there's so many things that go into it. It's the third-party applications you use. Are you patching Java? Are you patching Adobe? Those are applications that have known to have exploits and require continuous updates. Do you have a current firewall? You're paying for a security subscription. Is your alerting of all these platforms coming in? Are you aware of when somebody's trying to log into an Office 365 account? Are you aware of when somebody's blasting your external IP, trying to find a hole through your firewall? And I think, there's no such thing as enough when it comes to handling your security posture. And I think you've got to really tackle it from outside in. And I think, there's a lot of value in some of these third-party services out there, software as a service, that they can kind of simulate these vulnerability scans and these penetration testing attempts that hackers would use. It's these services that are going and trying to find all these loopholes. And, there's a lot of tools that we've looked into over this last year or two to kind of bolster, security offering that we have. And I think, the more time goes on, the more we realize, as a managed service provider, there's no such thing as the tool set we have today is exactly what we need, and that's all you need. It's an ongoing thing. So as these criminals evolve their tactics, we need to make sure that the tools and the preventative measures we have in place are also adapting to the evolution of the hackers.
Yeah, and I know I was listening to another podcast earlier in the week, and there's an industry expert, Shelley Palmer, who was on this podcast. I think it was called TechStream. And they were talking about this hack. As I mentioned, you really can't have a technical related podcast and not be talking about this right now. And one of the things that he mentioned was another good thing to think about is to have a couple of different email addresses. So we all sign up to all these different blogs and these different newsletters and all of these different kinds of things. But how often do we actually read those emails? So every one that we sign up to is kind of another spot that if it got leaked, well, now our information might get out there. So, what he had suggested is use your primary email address for stuff that that every time you get it, you're going to read it, you're going to look at it, and it's super important. But we all get stuff that, we kind of ignore, and then maybe it just kind of hits us at the right time and we go, oh, I've got some time, maybe I'll read that. Use a different email address for that type of stuff to kind of limit the exposure that you've got out there. And, I thought that was a good thought as well, as, whatever we can do to try to limit the amount of stuff that's being sent to us that could potentially kind of open us up to a breach like this.
Makes complete sense. I know for me personally, I very much adopt that type of that type of strategy with my own personal email. I have a couple different email addresses, and I have my primary that I want to make sure it's legitimate, and then I have a couple secondary emails that I don't even have set up on my phone or my computer. It's just if I need to register for something that it's kind of a one-time thing, I'm using those addresses. I don't got any kind of personal identifiable information in there. And so I think, from a business standpoint, it makes complete sense to follow that same thing. And, I think even just with password requirements in the past, right? It's always been a best practice recommendation to, cycle your password every 90 days and have an upper, lower, and 8-character minimum. And if you look at a lot of what the experts say, they actually don't recommend that anymore. The recommendation now is to not change your password as frequently, but instead to require an extremely long, complex password that's randomly generated characters. And the reason why is the longer your password is, the more difficult it is to hack into, to figure out. And by going back to the old ways that it was recommended, a smaller password, rotating frequently, what do people do? It's password 123 with a capital P and maybe a 0. And then, in 90 days, it's password 234, right? And that's what people do. Or it's, grandkids 2 and grandkids 3 and whatever it is. That's what people do because they want
Stop
something
giving
easy.
out my passwords.
Yeah, I know, right? way to put you under the bus. But that's what happens though, and we're used to always just trying to take that bare minimum approach. Everybody sets their password to the minimum requirement. Nobody's going above and beyond that. It's just it's not the human nature. I just want the easiest password possible. So it's actually recommended to make the minimum requirement much more complex, but not have to change it so often. And, and I think you're just finding as time goes on, in another 3 months to 6 months, I'm sure I can be on here talking about other, recommendations to how things traditionally in the past were, this was best practice. And now it's going to be like, hey, that's not the case anymore. And it's this constant reaction in the industry to what's happening in terms of security threats.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another thought too, you could always just do what I do. And if I'm signing up for something and it's something I need to get access to and I have to give an email address, but it's something I know I don't want to follow beyond that, I'll just use Brian's email address. So that's always an option as well. That way he gets all the junk mail and I don't have to deal with that.
Similar to my forwarding rule to yours. So yeah.
Right.
Just kind of got this roundabout circle going here.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff that, we've talked about in previous podcasts, and, we're trying to avoid kind of rehashing everything that we've talked about previously, but we've hit a lot of different security topics. So I would encourage you, if this is a topic that you're concerned with, and it should be, every business person should be thinking about ransomware, should be thinking about cybersecurity. Is my data protected? Is my company protected? I would encourage you to go back through some of our previous podcasts and listen to any of them that are talking about security. You'll learn stuff around multi-factor authentication, disaster and backup recovery, Office 365 security. There's lots of other topics. So, as opposed to just kind of sitting here and rehashing everything, I would encourage you to go back and listen to some of those as well. There's hopefully some good information in there that would be able to help you to really kind of look at where you're at and say, okay, do I have the appropriate, at least basic measures in place? And then, do I need to talk up to somebody about more advanced measures as well? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, this is a good reminder, that it's a real thing. This isn't just some buzzword we see on the internet. And the reality is if a company, if a major, gas production company is vulnerable, then as a business owner, you should be very much concerned about your vulnerability as well. And more just making sure you do have the precautions, like you're saying, in place, the basic measurements, and what additional, precautions should we be taking.
Yeah, because you would certainly hope that a company the size of a Colonial Pipeline, with the money that they've got in the industry that they're in and everything, that they would have good security measures in place. Now, we don't know the details. Maybe there was a hole left open. And
probably won't find out for a while either.
Exactly, but
especially
you got to kind of assume that they had
involved.
something, right?
They're not going to want to, if there is this known vulnerability, they want to keep that under wraps. They don't want to open the floodgates for potential, for all these other hackers to come in and take advantage of it. So, but you will see that information. They're going to have to validate, and I'm sure we can speak to that when that time comes.
Yep.
Totally.
Yeah. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, what would those things be? There's some basic things that you just want to make sure. When you look at your IT infrastructure, you want to make sure you don't have anything later than Windows 10 in there anymore, or for sure nothing Windows 7 or earlier in there. As far as your end user devices, you want to make sure you've got a actual business grade firewall on the server side, nothing 2008 or earlier. Those are kind of the basics where we know that there's certainly security concerns if those things are in place. So if you're sitting there, and a lot of companies are, and they're running some really old piece of software that might cost a ton of money to get off of, so that's why it's still in place, but it hasn't been updated in 15 years, and it only runs on Windows Server 2003 or Windows Server 2008. That's a big security concern. So you got to figure out, can I take it off the network? If not, then you really got to start planning for that. Putting that into the budget to get that updated and get off of that operating system. So that's probably one of the bigger things that we see as we start working with new clients is, we will find every so often still where somebody's running a Windows Server 2003 or 2008, and we ask, well, okay, well, why is that still there? And it's, well, I'm running this old piece of software, ERP or whatever it is, and it only runs on that, and it costs too much to upgrade it, and we kind of have to start working with them to build that into the budget and put that on the roadmap, because that right there is a big security hole that was just left open. So those are probably the biggest basics, but obviously there's a lot that goes beyond that with patching and antivirus and anti-malware and employee training and all of the other stuff that we've talked about. So there's, again, go back and listen to some of the old podcasts. We've really hit on all of that stuff. But we do appreciate you taking the time to join us again today. Like we said, this is definitely a current event, something that's been all over the news. So we wanted to touch base on it. And as we get more information, like Brian said, maybe we'll talk about it again in the future as stuff comes out about exactly how the breach happened and such. But we hope you enjoyed listening, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Interact with Tech Talk Detroit at techtalkdetroit.com or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.